During the season of Lent, we as Catholics traditionally focus on the three disciplines of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. This week I'd like to talk a little bit about prayer, because I think sometimes we make prayer a lot more difficult than it needs to be. I think all of us would recognize the necessity for communication with a friend, a family member, someone we're in a relationship with. Yet God, whom we claim to be the most important relationship in our lives, we often fail to do that. We often fail to communicate with God, which is what prayer is all about. Prayer is what keeps us connected to the Lord. I like to use the analogy of a lamp and a light socket. If the lamp's not plugged in, you can turn the switch all you want, but the light bulb's never going to light. And so it is with us and God. If we're not connected to God through prayer, if we're not plugged in, then we can never be that light. We can never be the Lord's disciples. And I think sometimes we make prayer more complicated than it needs to be. Prayer doesn't need to be spending hours on our knees in a cathedral. Prayer doesn't need to be sitting quietly for hours meditating in a church. All those things that probably none of us have time to do. Prayer can be talking to God in the shower. Prayer can be talking to God on the way to work. Prayer can be talking to God as we're waiting to pick up the kids from school. Each time, every day, that we take a moment to let God know what's going on in our lives, to talk to God about our problems, to ask God's help, that's prayer. That's what keeps us plugged into God, and that's what all of us need in our lives. So during the season of Lent, as we focus on becoming better people, the place to start with that is with prayer. Because if we're not plugged into God, if we're not allowing God to touch us and to open our hearts to Him, then we can never change. We can never be the light of Christ. We can never be His disciples. So as we enter into the season of Lent, maybe all of us need to look at how well we're plugged into God, how well we pray. And if we're not, then this is a great time for us to begin that communication, to strengthen that relationship, so that by being plugged into God, we can be the light of Christ. And by being plugged into God, God working through us can change the world.